Good morning, Greatview friends. Thanks for joining us on this July Sunday in the summer. So there's a child in the school playground waiting in line for her chance on the swing. An older boy comes along and pushes her aside to get the next spot on the swing for himself. Now, how does that make you feel? And can you imagine what the girl perhaps shouts out, "That's not fair"? Why do we feel this way in a situation like that? We probably agree with her kind of angry shout. But on what basis does our inner radar kind of feel her pain? Well, probably because we've been in similar situations where we felt it wasn't fair. On what basis does the strength of a more powerful person asserting their authority to do as they please, how does that rank as unfair? How do we judge what's fair and what's not fair, what's right and what's wrong? I was reading an article in the last couple of weeks, 4 ways to moderate your child's fixation with fairness. Here's a quote: "Having a sense of fairness is a great virtue and a sign that your child has a strong moral compass. Sometimes, however, children become obsessed with fairness to an unrealistic degree. If your child is obsessed with fairness, you'll need to work on balancing his or her expectations while appreciating his sense of justice." So which is it? Is that sense of justice or on what's fair, is that a great virtue? Is that a strong moral compass in our children? Or is that something that we need to balance with realistic expectations? Someone gets in a bike accident and ends up with a broken leg. Now, is that a time when we might say, well, that's not fair? No, probably not, unless somebody really did something to get that guy's broken leg. But for the most part, we realize that legs heal and eventually the pain is forgotten. On the other hand, someone gets cancer and slowly dies, painfully over several months. Is that a time when we say, oh, that's not fair? Yeah, we do sometimes, don't we? But why? On what basis do we make that call? I think back to Christmas 2004 and the tsunami in Asia, and there was 3 times more people who died in a single day than all of the American soldiers who died in the Vietnam War. That's not right. But who's to blame for a tsunami? It's just a natural disaster. For the war in Vietnam, there are a lot of people to be blamed. There were profound injustices on all sides. But for the tsunami, well, it just happened. But why does a little voice keep saying somehow, that's not fair? On the one hand, you hear people talking about the progress we have in Western civilization, perhaps, of improvements or real justice, we might say, on many issues over the past century or so. There's a sense that civilization is learning from history and moving forward, that there's progress, improved human rights for women, the technology that took us to the moon or put a computer in our pockets, or the demise of apartheid in South Africa, or the compassion that is expressed in many ways for natural disasters like the tsunami 20 years ago. But in just say the last 40 years, we have also witnessed some of the greatest injustices in all of human history. The war in the former Yugoslavia, the genocide in Rwanda, 9/11, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, the war in Ukraine. These are not signs of human progress, and they are examples of profound injustice. Bringing this a little bit closer to home, we have heard the cries in the Black Lives Matter, the conversations and the reality of what happened in a number of places during the pandemic, and the Indigenous Lives Matter, as we have reflected on the deaths of children in the residential schools here in Canada. Something is wrong, we say. Justice is needed, we cry out. Now, people cry out in various ways, and I've got a little song clip of a musician, a song that was on the charts a few years ago. Take a listen.
I thought I could find a way, be the system, make a deal and have no debts to pay. Take it all, I take it all, had to run away, be for myself, first class and first rate. But all that you have is your soul. So don't be tempted by the shiny apple, don't you eat of a bitter fruit. Hunger only for a taste of justice, hunger only for a world of truth, 'cause all that you have is your soul. Here I am, I'm waiting for a better day, a second chance, a little luck to come my way. Hope to dream, I hope that I can sleep again, awake in a world with a clear conscience and clean hands, 'cause all that you have is your soul. So don't be tempted by the shiny apple, don't you eat of a bitter fruit. Hunger only for a taste of justice, hunger only for a world of truth, 'cause all that you have is your soul.
That album of Tracy Chapman was number 3 on the charts in 1989, so a few years ago. Hunger only for a taste of justice, hunger only for a word of truth. Here I am, waiting for a better day. I want to wake up in a world with a clear conscience and clean hands. Now, Tracy Chapman is not a Christian believer, but somehow she knows there has to be something better, something more. Where does this deep desire for justice come from? This built-in sense that we have of what is right and wrong. But is it only a childish dream, something we have to help our kids sort out as they grow up? There is no Santa Claus, just parents who've bought into the marketing scheme of big business. The world is really about power and self-satisfaction. Take care of number one. That's the world that's out there. Now, we may organize our societies to kind of regulate power and self-centeredness, but real justice is just a foolish dream. Or maybe the dream is real, but it's only possible in some new world that's still to come, that better day that the songwriter is waiting for. We hope for something better, but it's not possible in this world, so bring your expectations down. Some Christians think that way as well, kind of waiting for the kingdom to come and not worried about what's happening in the present moment. Ideologies act like this. Let's destroy this present system and create a new world order where everything is fair and just. Well, that's been tried in the past century as well. Didn't turn out so well. And then just everyday politicians, whether people running for mayor or councillors, or often we hear language of, we'll make things better. or just maybe this feeling this sense of justice comes from the voice of someone speaking to us. Someone who created us with a sense of right and wrong, for relationships that are fair and just. Someone who's still calling out to us today. But we often ignore this voice, particularly when everything is going our way, when times are good. We often trust our own efforts, our own genius, so to speak. And it's only when injustice emerges, then we cry out for help. That's not fair. So we think of perhaps the Israel as slaves in Egypt. So who is it that answers that cry for justice? So this week, this message is my introduction to our summer series, Justice in a Broken World. Now, I typed that phrase in Google, and this is one of the images that popped up. Now, I didn't make that up. This artist was contemplating the reality of the world we live in and thought that this image was a fair representation. It's not just Christians who feel that the world is not as it should be. Any thoughtful person, anywhere in the world, knows that something is profoundly broken in the world in which we live. And so we cry out for justice. But who do we cry to? Well, the next few weeks, we're going to take a deep dive into what the scriptures tell us regarding justice, injustice, and God's response. As we work our way through these next few weeks, you'll discover that this theme is one of the most significant threads in Scripture from Genesis to Revelation. So let me take us back to the people of Israel enslaved in Egypt. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So this passage comes from Moses' first encounter with God at the burning bush. There's several things we hear in this passage. The people of Israel are enslaved. They're experiencing oppression. This is a place of desperation that they're crying from. It's a bad situation. But how did they get there? How did they go from being welcomed as the family of Joseph, the hero, the one who saved Egypt from famine, to 400 years later being enslaved and oppressed? Now that progression didn't happen overnight. But God says, these are my people, and I'm concerned. This is a God who wants relationship. This is a God who empathizes with the cause of the oppressed and the marginalized. You want to know who the God of the Old Testament is? This is who that God is. And there's, of course, an appeal for justice. Something is not right. You need to be rescued, God says. And then God makes it personal. I'm coming down. I'm going to take action. And finally, that action that God is going to take is God is going to function in human affairs through the available servants that he has. He says, I am coming down, but Moses, it's you who are going to stand and confront Pharaoh. So God removed Pharaoh because of his unjust and tyrannical rule. Egypt was Rasha. That's the Hebrew word, which in English we often translate as wicked. And sometimes we have an idea of what wicked means in English, but what does that actually mean in Hebrew? Egypt's actions were Rasha, actions that violate God's standards for life with other people. That's what the word means. Whatever we think the English word wicked means, that's what Scripture means. Actions that violate God's standards for life with other people. So the emphasis is not on the Egyptians' character so much. Those Egyptians are wicked in their person, but the Egyptians' actions are Rasha, because they violated appropriate relationships between human beings, people created in the image of God. And so Exodus makes it clear that God's judgment on Egypt is because of the economic exploitation, the enslavement, and the harsh treatment that they've given to the people of Israel. It's these actions that were Rasha, or wicked. And then, as we find, God removes Pharaoh through the combined efforts of Moses' confrontations and the divine actions of God. God is concerned about injustice, and he acts. But maybe not exactly in the way that we imagine or hope for. So let's move forward in the Scripture story, many centuries later, to the Roman imperialist occupation of Judea. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, and his wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless, because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. Zechariah and Elizabeth were godly, righteous, devout followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of King David, the God of Isaiah and Jeremiah. They were praying for Israel to be delivered from the Romans. They were also praying for a child for themselves. And they've been waiting a long time, you might say, for both. For God to deliver Israel from the Roman oppressors, and they've been waiting all their lives for a child. As the story goes, an angel appears to Zechariah and tells him that they will have a child for themselves, who will also be the waymaker for the coming Messiah, the one who will make things right. So, if you know a bit of the story, there's a bit more drama, and eventually the child John is born, and this is Zechariah's response. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. God has heard our cry. We've been waiting for centuries for an answer to our prayers, our cries. Elizabeth and I have been waiting all our lives for a child. God has come. See the connection between the way Zechariah puts it and the way it was there in Exodus 3. God has come. This is the beginning of setting all things right, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. Let's just pause for a moment on this word righteous or righteousness. It's appeared there twice in this reading. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in the sight of God. Now, it's an English word that we don't use every day, but it's about keeping the Lord's commands without blame, faultlessly. That's what being righteous means. That their actions were a sign of their inner character. And then it says the Redeemer will rescue us, says Zechariah, and enable us, help us to serve him with righteousness in all our days. Now, get a little bit technical here for a moment because we'll look at these phrases and words over the weeks to come. The Greek word here, dikaios, refers to someone in a right relationship with God. Other places in the New Testament, this Greek word is translated as just, a just person. In fact, Jesus himself is referred to as the just one, dikaios. There's another word, dikaiosune, the act of doing what is in agreement with God's standards. The Redeemer will come and help us to act in accordance with the intentions of God. Again, elsewhere in the New Testament, this word, dikaiosune, is translated as justice, to act with justice. So think about this for a moment. Regarding our children, let's say. Now, I love my child. She loves me. I ask her to go to bed at 8 o'clock because she needs her sleep to be able to function properly tomorrow at school. Now, she, of course, thinks that it'll be fine to stay up till 11 o'clock and, it won't be any problem. But I know, as the responsible adult, that the right thing is for her to go to bed at 8 p.m. So if she goes to bed at 8 p.m., she is acting with trust and in relationship with me for her own good, even though she might not understand exactly why. So if she goes to bed at 8 p.m., her action is dikaiosune. That is, it's a righteous or a just action. And then I think of her as dikaios, righteous, just. She and I are in a right relationship with one another because I've given her some direction, some guidelines, and she has trusted and acted upon that. And so we're good with each other, is a way of thinking about this. The people of Israel cried out from their suffering and enslavement, and God heard and came down to act righteously with justice through the actions of Moses. You'll see action and justice and righteousness, they go together. Zechariah and Elizabeth were crying out for deliverance from Roman oppression. They were crying out for a child. It's not fair. For their whole lives, they've been crying out. They waited while acting justly, acting righteously, in right relationship with God the Father. And God heard their cry for fairness, for justice. And he came down and he worked through them and through their son John and then to the Messiah himself to bring about the fulfillment of all God's promises. So somehow the cry for justice is related to the promises. God, you said you would do this. You said we would live like this, but we're not. And so justice is about putting things right as God has promised. So over the next few weeks, we're going to explore what the justice of God looks like, where it resonates with the world's viewpoint, where's the common ground, and then where the justice of God looks different than the way the world thinks about this topic. Now, there's a verse that I'm going to have us work at memorizing over these next few weeks. And some of us, of course, perhaps have this memorized already. But I want it to be kind of a backdrop conversation as we work our way over these next weeks. This is kind of a summary, this verse of all the things we need to know about this topic. From Micah 6:8, He has shown you, O people, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. What does the Lord want from us? Sometimes we hear people saying, well, what's the right thing to do? How do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? What's good? What's bad? He has shown you, O people, what is good. What's the Lord asking of us? It's not a secret. It's to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Those are dimensions of this discussion that we're going to explore in the weeks to come. So, there it is. That's our scripture memory verse, and we'll be refreshing it each week. In our live service on Sunday, we're going to be concluding the service with this song, Is He Worthy? The opening line is, do you feel the world is broken? We do. And as the song progresses, it's who is going to be found worthy to resolve the brokenness of the world, and that is Jesus. The Lord be with you, friends, as you walk this week, as you reflect on what it is that God has called you to be and to do, to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God this week. The Lord be with you, friends. Take care.